The arrival of BTS's Jungkook in the United States was anything but ordinary. From the moment his plane began its descent, an atmosphere of urgency blanketed the area around JFK International Airport. Law enforcement presence was unmistakable. SUV convoys with blacked-out windows pulled in long before any fanfare. Airport security, federal agents, and what looked like private bodyguards swept the terminal as if anticipating a national security risk. But this wasn't the arrival of a head of state or a political figure. It was Jungkook, and something was clearly very wrong. To the casual onlooker, it may have seemed like the over-the-top theatrics of a superstar. But to those who followed the harrowing pattern of Sasaeng behavior over the years, it was a justified, if not overdue, response to a deeply personal threat. According to multiple internal sources within HYB and independent security analysts, the decision to initiate what resembled a full-scale lockdown wasn't random. It was a reaction to credible information received days before his flight. Someone had already leaked his flight number. Worse, chatter on private forums hinted at plans to intercept him before he even cleared customs. Sasaeng's obsessive fans who cross every imaginable boundary have long been a shadow over K-pop idols' lives. But this time, the scale and precision of the leak shocked even veteran managers. Posts appeared online, many since deleted, listing the time Jungkook's plane was expected to land, his arrival gate, and even unconfirmed rumors about his hotel address. Security officials were horrified by how fast the information spread, especially when some Sasaengs claimed they had contacts inside, willing to help. In response, HYB didn't hesitate. They coordinated with US agencies, hired additional private contractors, and altered Jungkook's itinerary hours before departure. What was meant to be a quiet entry into the country for a supposed secret schedule, rumored to include an appearance on The Tonight Show and a private performance, became a security operation cloaked in secrecy. Even members of the production crew waiting stateside weren't given the exact time of his arrival. When Jungkook finally stepped into the arrival terminal, it wasn't to cheers, but to chaos and concern. A handful of fans were there, holding signs and calling his name. But among them were faces he and his team recognized. Known Sasaengs. Individuals who had, in the past, managed to slip into hotel lobbies, trail cars, and once even boarded the same flight as an idol. Some had traveled from other states. A few had devices rigged to stream in real time. The atmosphere was stifling. Jungkook's body language, as captured by press and fan videos alike, told the story plainly. This wasn't the joyful arrival of a star. It was the grim arrival of a target. In Seoul, word of the situation reached Jin almost immediately. Though recently discharged from military service, Jin has remained Jungkook's emotional anchor. Their bond, forged in years of shared stages and quiet conversations behind the scenes, has always been more than fan service. It's brotherhood. And it was Jin who, according to insider leaks, insisted that security be doubled, even tripled if needed. He had been awake all night tracking Jungkook's flight, refreshing updates like a worried parent waiting for a child to return home. And when it became clear that this wasn't going to be an ordinary landing, he sent a message that now lives in the heart of every Army member. Text me the second you feel something's off. Don't hesitate. I'll always answer. Jungkook read the message minutes after stepping off the plane. His reply, simple but raw, was, "I'm here, young. It's a little crazy already." And with that, security detail intensified. Guards moved closer. Exit plans were restructured. Even the decoy van that was meant to mislead waiting paparazzi was replaced with a second one to throw off anyone watching the hotel entrance remotely. But no matter how many walls you build, fame finds its cracks. Within an hour of Jungkook's arrival, images began surfacing online, some taken from elevated angles, suggesting long-lens cameras hidden in airport parking decks. One particularly disturbing shot captured Jungkook exiting the terminal, his face weary, his steps hurried, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. The image was accompanied by a caption that read, "Our baby is here, smiling face with heart eyes, we found him again, 2 hearts." The kind of post that would seem harmless if not for the obsessive history behind it. Fans were outraged. Not at Jungkook, but at the system. At the enablers. At the platform algorithms that let such posts trend. Hashtags like #ProtectJungkook and #RespectHisPrivacy erupted across social media. Many shared older clips of Jungkook speaking candidly about how terrifying Sasaeng encounters can be, while others called on HYB and law enforcement to take legal action. But there was something else, an emotional undercurrent that spread through every post, every comment, every whispered plea. Gratitude for Jin. In the noise, in the flash of cameras and the pounding of feet, Jin's quiet message stood like a lighthouse. A reminder that even as the world clamors for pieces of Jungkook, there's someone still fighting to keep him whole. It wasn't just about protection. It was about love. About having someone who sees the human beneath the icon. This wasn't the American debut Jungkook deserved. It wasn't the welcome ARMY had hoped for. But it revealed a deeper truth, that even in the most chaotic moments, a single act of care can become a shield stronger than any bodyguard. And while the world debates fame, obsession, and the ethics of fan culture, one brother simply waits by the phone, ready to answer the next time Jungkook says, "I'm scared." Because in the end, not every hero wears a mic. Some just send a message saying, "You don't have to be strong today. I'll carry it for you." As the night fell over New York City, Jungkook sat in the back seat of the SUV that had whisked him away from the airport chaos. The tinted windows shielded him from the outside world, but nothing could block out the aftershocks that trembled through his chest. His fingers gripped the edge of the seat, his thumb grazing the thread of the lucky bracelet Jin had once slipped onto his wrist without a word. The weight of silence between his thoughts pressed heavier than the city's skyline outside, and for a moment, it wasn't the cameras or the shouts that haunted him, it was the feeling of being watched by eyes he couldn't see. He hadn't spoken since leaving the terminal. His team knew better than to force conversation. He simply nodded at instructions and followed motions that had become second nature. Get in, stay low, don't look back. But even the security detail could sense the shift. Jungkook wasn't just shaken. He was on edge in a way they hadn't seen in years. The sense of intrusion had cut deep this time, not just physically, but mentally. Even in America, a continent away from Seoul, the shadows had followed him. Back in Seoul, Jin couldn't sleep. He watched the footage. He saw the angle of the camera that had captured Jungkook's face as he stepped outside, just a second too close, just a little too intimate, just invasive enough to break something inside. Jin paused the video and stared at the frame. It wasn't a photo to him. It was a scream. It was his little brother silently begging to be left alone. And Jin had never felt more furious. He called HYB again. This time, he didn't ask. He demanded more security, more silence about schedules. No leaks, no favors to fans, no tipping off the press, not even trusted insiders. He was done with the game of pretending that everything was under control, because it wasn't. And then he packed a bag. In New York, Jungkook arrived at the hotel through a back entrance only cleared an hour prior. Not even hotel staff were told who the VIP guest was. The entire floor had been rented out, a firewall of rooms surrounding his suite, creating a buffer zone against the noise, the whispers, and the risk. Inside the suite, the air was thick and still. Jungkook collapsed onto the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, the weight of everything finally spilling into his bones. He turned his phone screen on again. Jin's message still glowed. "You don't have to pretend to be okay." He wanted to reply. He wanted to say, "I'm trying," or "It's too much," or "Hyung, where are you?" But he didn't have to, because the moment his fingers hesitated above the keys, his phone lit up with a new message. "Tell the manager to unlock the suite door. I'll be there in 15. Jungkook blinked. At first, he thought it was a joke, a stress-induced hallucination. But when the knock came, 3 soft taps followed by a pause. The exact knock Jin had always used at the dorm. It felt like time cracked open. He stood, walked to the door with hesitant steps, and opened it. There he was.
No cameras. No stylists.
No official statement. Just Jin. Hoodie pulled low, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and the same calm look he always wore when the world felt like too much. Neither said anything for a moment. Jin stepped inside, dropped the bag, and placed a warm bowl of rice and side dishes on the table. Homemade, smuggled through the flight under layers of foil and care. "You haven't eaten," Jin said quietly. Jungkook's throat tightened. "I didn't know you were coming," he murmured. "You didn't have to," Jin replied. "You texted me." "I didn't say anything." Jin looked at him, his gaze gentle and certain. "You didn't need to." That night, they didn't talk about Sasaengs or fame or the trauma of being hunted by people who claim to love you. They didn't discuss security protocols or digital footprints or how many times Jungkook had been forced to smile while secretly panicking. They just sat there, two brothers, eating quietly, healing in the only way they knew how. And when Jungkook finally slept, it wasn't because he was no longer scared. It was because Jin was on the other side of the door, keeping watch. By morning, the headlines had shifted. The airport incident was still trending. Photos were still circulating. People were still speculating about Jungkook's secret schedule. But none of that mattered anymore, because Jungkook wasn't alone. And as long as Jin had breath in his lungs, he never would be. Let them follow. Let them shout. Let them try to break him. Jin would be there every time, sometimes with a message, sometimes with food, sometimes with silence. But always, without fail, with love. The kind of love that doesn't trend. The kind of love that doesn't need to be seen. The kind that simply is, even when the whole world forgets he's still just a person. Just a younger brother. And that makes all the difference. As the morning sun filtered through the curtains of the hotel suite, Jungkook stirred from sleep with a softness that felt unfamiliar. It wasn't the kind of jolt he'd grown used to. The kind where alarms, camera clicks, or vivid anxiety dreams woke him. It was slower, gentler. The kind of morning that didn't begin in panic, but in presence. Somewhere in the next room, he could hear Jin humming faintly under his breath, the sound of clinking dishes echoing in the quiet. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes and letting the calm settle around him like a blanket. The scent of warm broth wafted through the suite. Seaweed soup, unmistakably homemade. Jin had kept his word. He had shown up not as a global superstar, not even as a bandmate, but simply as Hyung. When Jungkook stepped out of the bedroom, he saw Jin already dressed in a hoodie and jeans, the kind of outfit that said, "I'm not here for the cameras." A cup of tea sat waiting for him on the table, already steeped and just slightly steaming. Jin didn't say anything at first, just gestured toward the chair opposite him, a quiet invitation to sit and breathe. "I didn't want to wake you," Jin said softly, as Jungkook settled in. "You looked like you needed that sleep more than anything." Jungkook nodded, taking the tea into his hands, the warmth grounding him. "Thanks for coming," he said, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how much I needed you here until I saw you." Jin gave a small smile, one that didn't need to stretch wide to carry weight. That's what brothers are for. Outside, the world continued to turn. News outlets speculated on Jungkook's next moves. Fans debated whether the Tonight Show appearance would be this week or next. Others shared blurry photos taken from suspicious angles, dissecting his body language, zooming in on his face, as if it were public property. But inside that room, the narrative had changed. It was no longer about performance or pressure. It was about protection. Jin had quietly taken the reins of a story that had threatened to spiral. Not by issuing statements or confronting the media, but by simply being there, anchoring Jungkook in the reality of what truly mattered. Later that day, Jin accompanied Jungkook to a closed-door rehearsal space, one only a few insiders even knew about. The building had been cleared, the perimeter checked twice, and the entrance patrolled not just by security staff, but also by local off-duty officers who had been briefed under the table. HYB hadn't made the arrangements. Jin had. Because Jin didn't trust the system anymore, not when it had failed to protect someone he loved this deeply. As they entered the space, Jungkook looked around. Mirrors lined the walls, stage lights dimmed to a soft blue hue, the faint echo of previous rehearsals still lingering in the air. It should have felt clinical, cold, but it didn't. Jin had even arranged for Jungkook's favorite in-ear monitor technician to be flown in, just to make sure everything sounded right. The details were subtle. but they spoke volumes. "Don't worry about the cameras today," Jin said as Jungkook walked toward the mic. "No one's filming. No one's leaking. It's just you. And whatever you want to let out." Jungkook hesitated. His fingers hovered over the mic stand. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had to impress anyone. He could just sing. And he did.
No flash choreography.
No rehearsed performance. Just his voice, clear and raw, filling the room in slow waves. Jin sat in the corner, watching silently. Not as a critic, not as a manager, but as someone who remembered what Jungkook sounded like before the fame. Before the stadiums. Before the fear. When the final note hung in the air, Jungkook lowered the mic and turned to look at Jin, a question in his eyes that didn't need to be spoken. "Still you," Jin said simply. And that's all that matters. The bond between them was no longer something to be speculated about in headlines. It wasn't performative or polished for the public. It was quiet, unshakable, and more powerful than any award, chart ranking, or endorsement deal. That evening, they walked through Central Park, disguised under hats and hoodies. The city moved around them, fast and loud, but in their little bubble of anonymity, there was peace. Jungkook didn't flinch when footsteps echoed behind them. Jin noticed it, of course, but his presence alone was enough to hold the storm at bay. "You know I can't always be there," Jin said as they sat on a bench beneath a tree blooming slightly out of season. "I know," Jungkook replied, eyes tracing the sky. "But you are." And that was the truth. Jin wasn't always next to him, but he was always with him. In the bracelet, in the texts, in the silence when it was needed most. So when Jungkook walked into the recording studio the next day, alone this time, he did it with a different kind of armor. Not one built by security teams or industry contracts, but one forged from something deeper.
Trust. Love.
Brotherhood. And the world, with all its noise, had to wait. Because Jungkook had finally found his footing again. And it started with a knock at the door.